Look at this quilt. Oh my goodness, look at this old quilt. I love this. It's so bright and cheerful and wonderful, and I can't wait to dive in and talk about this quilt in this episode of Lessons from an Old Quilt. If you're new here, my name is Chris O'Neill from Sew the Distance. Every month or so, I feature a different vintage or old antique quilt, like this one, that I have from my collection, or for ones I pick up at auctions or yard sales, because these quilts, they really seem to find me, and this one is no exception. So I bought this at a yard sale. I paid $5 for it. Yes, $5. Now, to be fair, it was marked 10, although I probably would have paid 10. The woman who sold it to me recognized me from last year when I purchased a different quilt, this quilt, from her, and I also did a Lessons from an Old Quilt on that. It's probably from the 1930s, 1940s because of the fabrics. And keep in mind that some of these fabrics have been reproduced. So sometimes people will say to me, well, I have that fabric in my collection. These are the original, a lot of them feed sacks, and they did reproduce them too over the years. So keep that in mind. This, I believe, is original from the 1930s, 1940s because of the condition and because of some of the other clues that I can find in this. This measures 71.5 by 86 inches, so it's a pretty big quilt, and it's so wonderful. So let's dig in, take a closer look at this beauty, and see what we can learn from the maker of this old quilt. I love the colors, the brightness, the wonderful vibrancy of this. It's so awesome. So let's talk about the block. I'm gonna pick a block that's gonna really stand out. Actually, this purple one is going to be perfect. This is the actual block. It's a bow tie block. Isn't it cute? So we have these shapes. They're 5-sided shapes. There's 4 of them, and then there's this square in the middle. This does require inset seams if you're gonna make it this way, and it's a lot easier to do that, in my opinion, by hand. You can do it on the machine, but it's tricky. And when you put 4 of these blocks together, I'll move this up, you get, let me see, I'll have to piece these together a little bit. You can see that it makes this octagon shape or circle shape when they all come together here in the middle. And that's all the maker did, was turn the blocks to give this wonderful, wonderful effect of a circle, or what looks like a circle, but is actually an octagon. Love that. You can see there is some dirt on this quilt, and I'll show you on the back. There's a lot of dirt on the back of it. I think some of this dirt will come off with a washing, so stay tuned for that. All right, let's talk about the fabrics, because the fabrics are wonderful. But before we do that, there are 99 of these bow tie blocks in this quilt, and each of them are about a 7-inch square. There are 9 blocks going across the quilt and then 11 rows in the quilt. And it's a really neat effect with this layout. There isn't any sashing. As you can see, these blocks are just butted up against each other. Oh, I'm so here for it. So let's talk about the fabric, because the maker was very clever with this. First of all, the fabrics are amazing. There's a lot of feed sacks in here. It's all cottons. And then we have the juxtaposition of the prints with the solids, which also gives this wonderful effect on this. None of these background pieces for the block are prints, only the bow ties. And the maker did some fun stuff with that too. So let's move up here to this one. We can see with this plaid block here, the maker took great care in making sure that there was a contrast in the direction of the fabric when there was a direction in the fabric. So we can see that with this plaid. The plaids are going the same direction on this side, but then they are on an angle here, giving that full effect of the bow tie. Now, fabrics that don't have a directional print, like this one, of course the maker didn't do that, but on all the others, you can see here, the maker did do that. And I love that, especially with the plaids. I love the purple plaid, but then there's this brown plaid. Oh, look at that one. So, so neat. We even have a stripe that the maker did that with. It's a really cool effect, and it is that extra detail that brings your eye to these blocks and makes them look like a bow tie. The fabrics are so wonderful overall. They're great. I love this one. This one might be from like the 1940s. That's why I think it's a little bit later. But most of them, I believe, are 1930s, 1940s. I don't see anything later. At least with my research, I haven't found that. Let me know what you think. So the backgrounds of these are all bright colors. We see greens and pinks and blues and yellows, and it's so wonderful. One thing about this quilt, however, is that the lower portion, which would be over here, is much brighter than the top portion, which is here, of the quilt. And I believe that's because of fading. You can really see it with this block. This print here, I believe, is the original colorway or closer to it. But when we put it up against this print, and maybe it is just a lighter version of this print, but look at the difference. If it is faded, wow, that is a huge difference in fading. I do think the top portion is faded. It could have been from being on a bed and having the sunlight hit it, or it could be because of the way it was stored, which we'll talk about in a minute when we look at the back of this quilt. Either way, I love the way it looks with it being faded. Oh, you can see right even here, look at this. There's actual line where the fading starts and stops. So this block is a perfect example of where you see the fading between the two. Anyway, either way, I actually love the effect now. It gives it an ombre look. I know it wasn't intentional, but it's a really cool look now, even though it is a damaged portion. There is a lot of dirt on this quilt. I am going to wash it. There aren't any holes or tears, so I'll probably wash it in the machine on a gentle cycle and then hang it out to dry. If there were any tears or holes, I would be really careful and cautious about that and maybe wash it by hand. But because there isn't, I am going to throw it in the wash. And you can see here's another example of some dirt. I think a lot of this is going to come off. When we look at the back, you'll see even more dirt and stuff on it. This quilt is completely done by hand. It is completely pieced, quilted, and you can see these wonderful quilting stitches, and even finished with the binding, which is a wraparound binding by hand. Okay, speaking of the binding, we'll go over here to the borders and take a peek at that. So the borders are made with this wonderful bubblegum pink, which is perfect for this bright, vibrant quilt. It just goes well together. The binding is wrapped around from the back. So it's called a self-binding method. So they just brought the backing, made it a little bigger, and folded it over and hand stitched it down. The quilting in the borders is on a diagonal, whereas the quilting in the blocks is shadowing the block itself. Now, what's really fun, and something I noticed after I took a closer look at this quilt and started studying it, is that these are done on the diagonal, and the ones on this border are done in the same diagonal. And the one on this border over here are done in the opposite diagonal. So this top border, or what is the top border of the quilt, is the only border that has a different direction of the quilting. Isn't that cool? I don't know if that was on purpose or was an accident, but I love it. I love those little quirky things that happen in these quilts. All right, let's take a peek at the back. First of all, I love this print. This is so pretty. And it is seamed. You can see that here, where the seam is, that runs down the middle of the back. Get this straightened out more. There we go. But we do see a lot of dirt in the fold lines, and we see it both ways, more so this way. I am sure this is from being stored this way. This was probably the fold that was out and got a lot of the dirt. What's nice is that it was folded in, so the print, the front of the quilt was folded on the inside, I think, and this was on one of the folds on the outside, which is good because we don't have this line down the front of the quilt. Of course, that's a really good argument as to how the fading happened too. It probably did happen on a bed now that I look at it and think about it. The quilting doesn't really show up here on the back because of the busy print, which is always a good tip too for us. If you aren't great at quilting, always use a busy print on the back because it'll hide any imperfections. Isn't this quilt great? Oh my goodness, I love it so much. It's so pretty. It's one of my favorites. I know, I say it every time. I say it every time. Let's talk about the lessons we can learn from this incredible, incredible quilt. The first thing I want to talk about is the solids with the prints. For some reason, this is so intriguing to me because it's something I would never think to do. And I really need to be better at thinking to do it because I see it in all these old quilts and it is so cool the way it looks, especially with the layout of this fabric and how the maker turned it so it looks like a bow. I love this. I love the attention to detail. Sometimes we think of these quilts as being utilitarian, which they are, okay? A lot of them are. They were a need that was being filled, but also there's so much creativity that goes into these quilts, and it just shows. It's those little tiny things like turning that fabric that just make this sparkle. Even that quilting, which may have been a mistake, but I love that little detail that I found while examining this quilt, something I may not have noticed had I not really taken a close look at it. Another thing that we can learn as modern makers from this old quilt is about that secondary pattern. This maker took that secondary pattern and made it the primary pattern, basically. That could have came from the fading. Either way, it's something we can learn because we could do that in our own quilting endeavors. We could take those secondary patterns and make them the primary focal point of the quilt, with the intended primary pattern being the background. I hope that makes sense. And then the last lesson that I'm going to talk about here, I do have more on my blog, so you can check that out. The last lesson I'm going to talk about, though, is folding quilts. As we store quilts, we need to be aware that sometimes those folded edges can get dirty or collect dust, just even in climate control, normal use. So it's important to refold our quilts and pay attention to that. Some even talk about folding them on the diagonal, which is always a good idea too, to eliminate some of these creases. Either way, as modern makers, we do need to be aware of this, that this can be something that happens and can be prevented with old and new quilts. Make sure to check out my blog. I have a lot more details on it and you can take a peek at that. Sign up for my newsletter too if you want to. I am going to go ahead and wash this, and if you want some updates on how it all turns out, you can check out my other social media pages. I'm on all the socials. You can also check out my blog, and I might be doing a short video or something on this too to see how it turns out. I hope it comes clean. I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope you take some time to sew, and I'll see you real soon. Bye.